Good afternoon. I'm Carrie Otto. I'd like to welcome all of you. It's great to see such a good crowd today for our second edition of My Life, My Story. I want to welcome you all here. I want to ask you before we start to please turn off your cell phones if you happen to have them with you. And I guess that's the only announcement I have to make. It's on? Okay, that's on. So I guess we're ready to go. Today we're going to have Ray and Judi Larson tell their story to us, and I'm very intrigued. Country boy meets city girl. What in the world could that possibly mean? Well, now we're going to find out. So I turn it over to the Larsons to tell us what it's all about.
Is your speaker on?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Ray Larson, and I am a country boy.
I'm Judi Larson. I'm a city girl.
Thank you for coming. Well, to begin with, first of all, I want to thank you for coming. I was a little bit worried about this because some of my friends were kind of dropping like flies. They said they weren't going to be here. A couple of weeks ago, I met Judi Toner in the hall, and she said, Ray, I really want to hear your presentation with Judi, but she said, I can't make it because I'm having eye surgery. And I said, oh, you're okay because it's not till a week from Monday. And she said, I'm having surgery on the second eye. And then just last Saturday, Bob Carlson was walking out, and we were next to him, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't make it because I'm having surgery on my ear. So here we are. You have come, and we will do our best. It is a little intimidating, however, to follow Darla. I mean, when she was last month and all that she had to offer, which was a wonderful story, whoever would follow had to be fairly brave, and they needed someone, and so I said, well, we'll try it. So here we are, and I guess when you have a story, you start with when you're born. So my story, however, begins a little while before I was born, obviously. I was born on the farm in Minnesota, and the first child in our family was a girl. Unfortunately, she died in childbirth. And then there was a boy after the girl, and then there was a girl, and then there was a boy, and then number 5 comes along, and my parents assumed that that would be a girl, and so they had Ramona picked out. Well, my plumbing didn't match, and so they named me Raymond instead. I was born at home. Is this feeding? Are you getting feedback? Okay. I was born at home. Well, we're getting feedback up here. Not much? Okay. I was born at home in the same house that my father was born in. My grandfather homesteaded that place. My father was born there in the house, and I was as well. And one thing unique about my birth, I was born in January in Minnesota. It was very cold, and so when the doctor came to deliver me, he had to sterilize the scissor when he was going to cut the cord, and he went out to the wood-fired kitchen stove, and he sterilized the scissor on the kitchen stove. So,
And it's a good thing that I was not born at home because I was born in a hospital and I weighed 9 pounds and 13 ounces. My mother said I was big, but I was beautiful. The hospital was in Northfield, Minnesota. Northfield, Minnesota is famous for cows, colleges, and contentment. The 2 colleges are Carleton College and St. Olaf College. My Grandpa washed dishes at St. Olaf, and my dad milked the cows at Carleton, but I never got to go to either of those colleges. Not long after that, we moved to the city because my dad became a motorman for the streetcars in St. Paul. We moved into a part of a duplex, one side of the duplex. It had 3 bedrooms. And back then it was just when men were coming home from the war and women, and they were looking for places to live. And so a lot of people took in roomers. So in the last bedroom, there was Lyle and Harold Baker, and they had been in the service. They slept in just one full-size bed. In the middle bedroom, there was Nicholas Phalagas, and he was Greek, and he had a lot of books around the walls. He had a big desk and a big chair, and he had candy. So we visited him quite a bit. Then in the big bedroom, that was where the whole family slept. There was 6 of us, my mom and my dad, my brother Jim, me, my sister, and when my baby sister Linda came, she was there too, in the crib. And all of us shared the same bathroom.
Including the 3 that boys.
Yeah.
Okay, all 9.
All 9 of us.
Oh.
Um,
Did I throw you off?
you're supposed to talk about the farm now.
Oh, okay. So I obviously was born on the farm, and my parents were married in the 1934, and after they were married, they moved and took over the farm that my grandpa had homesteaded, and it was during the Depression, and those of us who were raised by Depression parents know how much the Depression affected the attitude of people. And my dad had $50 in a little bank in town about a mile and a half away. And he had heard that the bank was going to close, and so he went and he got his money out of the bank, and it did close the following day. He didn't really trust banks the rest of his life, and he was very, very frugal. We never had a new car. We never had one piece of new machinery. We never had any new appliances except for one. My mother entered a contest and she won an electric dryer. And so the dryer was delivered. I remember still when it was hooked up. The first load of clothes went into the dryer and they were tumbling. My dad saw it was working okay. He went outside to the power pole and he looked up at the meter. They sold the dryer the next week. So on this farm that I grew up on, it was primarily a dairy farm, but we also had chickens and hogs. My mother raised about 200 chickens, and she took care of them, and she would gather the eggs, and every Friday, we wouldn't go shopping, we would go trading. She would take those eggs, about 30 dozen every week, to a country store, and we would trade them, and then we would get groceries. We would get credit on the bill, so was a different concept of shopping. Now, the cows that we had we had 20 cows, and this was before milking machines. But with a father and 3 sons, there were 4 milking machines. And so we each had our own stool that we would sit on. We each had a pail that we put between our legs. And Holstein cows are known for producing a lot of milk, so we usually, with that pail, it was not unusual to get between 3 and 4 gallons of milk both morning and evening. Well, it was during the summer, and my dad was milking the best cow, and he was on a stool. He had his head buried into the belly of the cow, and he was sitting there and he was milking away, and he noticed that the cow started to shake her head. And he looked up, and there was a bee that was kind of flying around, and cow kept thinking, well, he was going to milk fast. He wasn't going to give up. And so then the bee flew into the ear of the cow. And you can imagine what happened then. So he was done. He took the pail of milk over and he dumped it into the 10-gallon milk can. But before he did, he noticed that the bee was there in the milk. Now, Norwegian ingenuity can figure this out. In one ear and out the other. So I was the youngest of the family, obviously. And when I graduated from high school, my dad was 60 years old and he was beginning to think about retirement. And so he was kind of hinting that maybe I would take over the family farm. Well, I kind of put the kibosh on that because I did not want to be tied down on the weekends. Well, God laughed and called me to ministry, and I was tied down every weekend.
No, you can take the country boy off of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the country boy. So my dad was a country boy. Every Sunday after we were in church, we would drive out to Webster and Northfield, and we'd visit a farm. And we could visit a lot of them because my dad was the oldest of 9 children, the Barsnesses. His mother was the oldest of 18 children, and that they were the Fredricksons. Now, the Fredricksons had their own baseball team. They had uniforms, and they played on Sunday afternoons around the surrounding towns. And there was an article about them. Oh, their parents never went to a game because Sunday's a day of rest. So my mother sent me an article that was in the Sports Illustrated Heritage issue. And the Fredrickson team was in there. There was a picture of them, and there was an article about them. But there was one paragraph that she had cut out. And I kept wondering what was in that one paragraph. Well, it turns out it said that they beat their arch rivals, the House of David, and with the winnings, it took them 2 days to get home 24 miles. And she didn't want me to know we had relatives like that would drink that much. When I was 7 years old, my dad told us that my mom had a heart attack. So we were all going to get shipped, or we all went to somebody's house for a year, and then we'd get back home. Well, he put us on the Red River Special, which was a train that went from St. Paul up to Grand Forks, North Dakota. He said, when you get to Grand Forks, your Aunt Myrtle will take you off the train and behave, be good. So we did that, and she did get us off the train. My sister Harriet stayed with her and her family in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Jim and I got to ride with my grandparents back to Cooley, North Dakota, where my grandpa was a Lutheran minister. And there was a 2-room school in Cooley, and my grandma took really good care of me when I was there. She was little and she was loving, and she would put my socks on the oven door to get them warmed up before I put them on for the day. You know, he wore brown ones during the week when he went to school and white ones on Sunday. She also made really good donuts, like grandmothers do. Not this grandmother, but like grandmothers used to do. I did find out about my mother's heart attack. Many years later, I said to her, "Mom, what was wrong with you when we all got sent away to live with different people?" She said, "I weighed less than 100 pounds and I cried all the time." So I think it was postpartum depression, not a heart attack. When we got home from there, my dad announced that we were going to move to Minneapolis instead of St. Paul because it would be easier to get along with the Swedes in Minneapolis than the Irish in St. Paul. I did forget to tell you one thing about Cooley. I looked for it when we were coming back from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho a few years ago. Couldn't see it. I asked somebody. They said Cooley is a ghost town of North Dakota. And if you look it up on the web, it says ghost towns in North Dakota, Cooley. No. We did move to Minneapolis, and I went to Cooper Elementary School, Sanford Junior High, and Roosevelt High School. There were 723 in my class when I graduated. And Governor Jesse Ventura, which maybe you've heard the name, he was in those same schools. But when I read his biography, it didn't sound at all like the communities that I lived in.
I
The
think he
reason-
actually dated her, but she won't admit it.
He was younger than me, thank goodness. Anyway, the reason that he became governor of Minnesota was he was running against Hubert Humphrey's son, and his name was Skip Humphrey. So when the people saw, when the Norwegians, when they saw the ballot, it said Skip Humphrey. So they did, and they voted for Jesse Ventura. After high school, I keep on, or are you going to go talk about your high school?
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. After high school, I went to a small 3-year school of nursing in St. Paul, Minnesota. And then after I graduated from that, I went to college, a small college in St. Paul, to get a Bachelor of Science in Missionary Nursing and a music degree. No, you can take over.
Okay. Well, when it comes to education, I have to tell you that I did my first 8 years in a one-room schoolhouse. How many of you did your education in a one-room school? Oh, yeah, okay. 3 or 4 of you. In that one-room schoolhouse, there were 3 in my grade, and so I never, had a lot of competition, but that was not part of my experience anyway in school. But one of the things in the one-room schoolhouse that was a particular memory, one day I was probably about in 4th or 5th grade, and I was doing my arithmetic in the math book, and we smelled smoke, and somebody told the teacher. She went downstairs and looked in the furnace room, and there were flames from spontaneous combustion, I guess it was, in the furnace room. I can still remember hearing her coming running up the steps and said, "Children, get out of here, this place is on fire." And so everybody rushed to the cloakroom at the other end of the building, and I went and I had my arithmetic book in my hand. I thought, what am I doing with this? I turned it and I threw it all the way back, and maybe that's where the checkbook still doesn't balance very well. So in high school was a very positive experience. There were primarily 3 things that meant a lot to me. 1 was social activities, 2 was athletic competition, and a distant 3rd was studying if necessary. And that caught up with me when I got to college, because when I entered college, I had to take remedial English. And you know what that's called, bonehead English. Well, I had a good teacher, but anyway, so I was admitted under scholarship probation. I played basketball for a year, and I didn't still know how to study very well, and this was a problem for me that was catching up, and I knew that I had to solve this problem. And I figured the best way I could solve this problem if I knew someone who really knew how to study, and I could study with them. And I found her.
You forgot.
I did eventually get on the dean's list, by the way.
You forgot to say you got on strict academic probation and you couldn't play basketball.
I
and
was
that's
going to
why you
skip
decided.
that.
Well, I was at the same college that he was at, but I really didn't know him that well. And one night we were going to have a basketball game out of town. So I went on the spectator bus, he went in the team bus, and in the last second of the game, he shot from mid-court and made the basket and won the game. So I thought, wow, I should look like when they come out of the locker room and see if anybody's waiting for him. And there wasn't anybody waiting for him. So I did. No, I didn't. I walked to the spectator bus. He walked to the team bus, and I was right beside him. And he said, watch out for that root that is sticking up out of the ground. You don't want to fall. And I thought, oh, he's handsome. He's not academic. No, he's athletic. And he's considerate. Now, I know that some of you women think that he must not be so considerate anymore because when we walk in the halls, he's always ahead of me and I'm following along behind. But his name means wise protector. And he's ahead of me looking for the landmines. and I really have been the trailing spouse for 58 years.
3 times. Oh,
Then when we graduated from,
how we met.
then we went a day or two later they called it the Nibble Nook in our college. It's a snack bar. And, in other colleges, they probably wouldn't call it the Nibble Nook. But I brought my lunch from home, and I was buying a Coke. And he said, well, it must be nice to have your lunch from home. And I said, well, if you would have told me, I could have brought you one. And he said, how about tomorrow?
Away to a man's heart.
So the college was in St. Paul. I lived in Minneapolis. I went home. I baked chocolate chip cookies. I had to be at the emergency room in St. Paul at 3 o'clock to go to work. And then we had lunch together the next day. After we're at the point where I was 22 years old, and my minister was calling me an unclaimed blessing. and there was a big Sunday school poster up, and my uncle took a picture of me, and the name of the contest they were having was Operation Manhunt.
I didn't have a chance.
But these men didn't know that ever since junior high, I had been praying for the person that God had picked out for me to marry, that he would guide him and he would protect him.
Teach him how to study.
And that I would know him when I met him. So I thought, well, this must be the man here. And we studied together, and we did graduate from the college. And then we went.
Oh, how about we got married first?
No, yeah. Now is when you women really have to listen to this because it's the country boy versus the city girl. We got married, and he said, maybe we should just go to the farm for our honeymoon because then my parents, who can never get away because they're milking cows, could go up to the north shore of Lake Superior. And I said, okay. And we went there. His mother had made her pancake batter and put it in the refrigerator. So when I made pancakes, he thought, oh, she's good cook, like just like my mother. She also put in candy bars. And we said, what are the candy bars for? Well, she said, the people in the neighborhood come and shivaree. I said, shivaree? And she says, well, they come and they make a lot of noise. They bang on pans, and then you have to give them candy, and then they'll leave. So we did that. When I first saw him, he was going out to milk, and he was wearing barn clothes. I mean, I know that they wear barn clothes to go out to milk, but all I've ever seen was college clothes, church clothes, and basketball clothes. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be new. And he went out and milked the cows. And then he said to me, would you like to see a calf delivered? Because there's one that's delivering right now. I said, sure. And I went out there, and the calf's legs were coming out, and he put a rope around those legs, and then the head was coming out, and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and there was the calf. And that's when I decided he was never going to be in the delivery room. I think that's it.
Right?
Oh, on Sunday at noon, then on our honeymoon, we went to Joe's Cafe for dinner, and we even got to order a piece of pie because it was only 10 cents an extra. I think that's the last time we ordered dessert in our lives.
Well, you can see that my father's frugality, kind of wore off on me, but how many people get a free honeymoon? I mean, she, however, used that story. She said we never had a honeymoon for probably about 15 to 20 years. When we got to China, I said, I don't want to hear this story anymore. Well, after we got married, our first place of ministry was in Duluth, Minnesota. We were planning to go out to go to Beirut, Lebanon as missionaries. That's what our training was for. But we had to have 2 years of home service, and there were no little churches for me to go and be a pastor in, and so this became kind of a substitute. And it was in a Presbyterian church in Duluth, a Second Presbyterian church. It's an old downtown church that had a gymnasium with balconies on each side and a stage at the other end. It was basically dying because it was in the inner city. So we had a ministry with the youth in the community, and every week we would have about 150 kids who would come in, and Judi was very active in that, playing the piano and organizing and doing things with the kids. And so we were there for...
I did make a mistake, though, because this was inner city, and I was giving them pieces to learn for the Christmas program. And we had these 2 little boys, twins, Kelly and Carrie. And so I gave him the piece, and the piece was, what should I give him, poor as I am? And I'm sure that they brought that home, and their mother said, poor? Why is she saying this? So they didn't show up.
But the other story about Kelly and Carrie was that they had a little sister who was always with them, and her name was Kimmy Sue. And anytime the church door was open, Kelly and Carrie would be there with Kimmy Sue, and I'd have to tell them, there's nothing going on, you got to go home. And so one day they came, and I said, I think you need to go back home. And he said, oh, no, we can't go home. My mom has a friend with her right now.
A visitor.
A visitor. Yeah, visitor, that's right. So anyway, that was Duluth. And so during that period of time, Judi had issues with one of her kidneys, and so they said, you can't go to the mission field. Well, then that kind of re-scrambles your thinking. And so I obviously felt a call to be a missionary. So at that particular time, then I kind of readjusted and said, well, I guess I want to go into ministry and become a pastor. So I went and interviewed at a seminary, and they said, you don't have a very broad background in the liberal arts. You need to go back to college. So I went back to school and got a Bachelor of Arts with a major in philosophy. And then I went to seminary. And while I was in seminary, I served 2 small congregations about halfway between Duluth and the Twin Cities at Hinckley, Minnesota. Anybody here ever heard of Hinckley, Minnesota? Oh, do you know what Hinckley is famous for? The forest fire. In 1894, there was a forest fire in the Hinckley area, and there were 418 people who died in that fire. And it burned over 250,000 acres. The only thing I'll say about my experience as a student pastor in Hinckley was that the saying among the Presbyterian pastors who had preceded me and ones who followed me was, oh, did you go through the Great Hinckley Fire too? Because there was one buck elder in that congregation who there was no way you were going to change anything, and if you didn't, run around him, he'd run right over you. And so, um, it's a learning experience when you're young. So anyway, we were there at Hinckley, and then while we were at Hinckley, a letter came in the mail, and the church, the Presbyterian Church in Spicer, Minnesota, was looking for a pastor, and I got called there, and we were there for 15 years. It was a great experience. The church grew, and I was able to serve on the school board for 2 terms, and I eventually went into administration. But there is one story from that congregation that I kind of hesitate to tell, but it's part of my story, so I have to tell it, and I'll kind of just set it up by saying this is a story where the sacred meets the profane in one short phrase. We had a gentleman in the church who had a speech problem. He stuttered. I am not making fun of him or the issue of stuttering, but if I don't do this right, you won't get the point of the story. So anyway, he would come every week, and he would mow the lawn, and he just loved to do that. So one day I went out, and I said, I just have to say thank you to Irv for all that he's doing. And he stopped the lawnmower, and he sat back, and we're talking, and he says, Reverend, last week I was mowing, and the clouds in the sky came, and they were forming, and I stopped and I watched them, and I saw the face of Jesus up there, and I had this skeptical look on my face, and he said, "God damn it, Reverend, I know it was Jesus." He didn't miss a syllable. A kind of a similar story that I just heard not long ago. This guy was talking to his pastor, and he said, "Reverend, will I go to heaven if I chew tobacco?" And he looked at him. He says, "Yeah, but when you spit, you got to go to hell." Well, where was I?
We just forgot to tell them that we had 2 daughters when we were living in Duluth.
Oh, yeah.
Their names Janine and Beth. One means gift from God. The other one means dedicated to God.
And did you want to tell them about when you moved to take care of Ella? Or that's later. Later. Okay. So anyway, 15 years at the church in Spicer, and then I went into administration for 10 years. And while I was in administration with the Presbyterian Church, Presbyterians don't have bishops, but we have executive presbyters. And so anyway, that's what I was. And it was during that time that I had to deal with a lot of congregations where there was conflict that was going on. I had oversight of 62 congregations. And that experience, coupled with my later studies on this particular issue of conflict in the congregations, basically consumed the rest of my career. But I'll say more about that later.
You'll say about when I got to go have a job.
Oh, I did. You did have a job for pay. I'm sorry.
He's supposed to say, well, we had these girls, and they were in school, and so Judi got to go and get a career of her own. And so I applied at the hospital there, and I became an operating room nurse. Now, I'm not going to tell you what goes on behind the doors that say "do not enter," but I'm going to tell you a few stories about people that I heard that were coming for surgery. And if he can tell that story with that kind of language, I can tell hospital stories. And so the first one, there was a Norwegian bachelor farmer there. We always say things like that about Norwegians in Minnesota, but we also say Norwegian ingenuity. So then, that's a compliment. Well, this was his first time in the hospital, and he really needed to use a urinal, but he didn't know what to call it. And so he rang the call bell, and this little LPN student came in and she said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Well, uh, I need a vase." And she, and she said, "How big is your bouquet?" That's why we'll be leaving town soon here. They're going to get rid of me. Um, then another one was a woman who filled out the pre-op form, and where it said sex in that blank, she put once in Monaga. And Monaga was a little town up in northwestern Minnesota. The last one was this little boy was going to have surgery, and he was waiting there, and on the next bed was a woman that was a grandmother, just like us, a loving grandmother, and thought that she should talk to him. So she said, "Are you going to have your tonsils out?" He says, "No, they're going to pull down my nuts." And
Are you done?
no. Well, I have one more, but this isn't about the hospital. This is about about us and how we've been downsizing. All of us have been downsizing. Well, my parents, after everybody moved out of the house, started collecting things. They were bad collectors. The house was really getting full. Ray went to a conference and he asked a psychologist, "Is there a name for this disease?" And the psychologist said, "You call it anal retention." And they're usually constipated too because they don't want to get rid of anything. And so our daughter was in high school, and her boyfriend was down in high school in the Minneapolis, and she was visiting Grandpa and Grandma. And he called her and he said, "Can I come and see you?" She said, "No, no, you can't come over here." He said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Because my grandparents have a disease." And he said, "Well, is it contagious?" She said, "No." He said, "Well, what do you call it?" And she said, "Anal retention." And he said, "Can they sit down?" And she said, "If they clear off a spot."
Very good, very good. Just a couple of lines about my experience in working as an interim pastor in congregations that were in conflict. It is only the Southern Baptist denomination that has done an extensive study on conflict in the congregation and particularly on what is called involuntary terminations. We don't call it being fired, it's involuntary termination. But in their studies, approximately 24.5% of their pastors at one time in their career will experience being fired from the congregation that they're serving. And I interviewed the heads of several other mainline denominations, and they said that they thought that that percentage was about accurate for them as well. So anyway, now just two or three humorous stories from my life as a pastor. One church that I was at, this large woman was in for surgery on her knee, and I went to visit her. Came in the hospital door, the bed was right there, and she was sitting on the other side. She said, "Reverend, come on around. I want to show you my scar on my knee." So I kind of walk around the bed, and she kind of fluffs up her hospital gown. She goes like this, and she says, "You know, if it doesn't get any better, I'm going to have to insult another doctor." She was a master of spoonerisms, and she didn't know it. She was also diabetic, and the next time when I visited her, she told me that she had had a shot with an epidemic needle. So, and the last one that I guess I can tell is that I had a memorial service in a funeral home chapel, and when I got done, this lady comes up to me, this sweet little lady, and she takes my hand, she brings it up tight to her breast, and she looks me in the eye, and she said, "Reverend, that was the most beautiful urology I've ever heard." Now you want to say the real Ray?
This could be a lot longer because we do have stories to tell, but we knew that we had to cut it down. We could tell about when our house burned down, or we could tell about our special needs granddaughter who couldn't go to school anymore because she was getting pneumonia. And I moved up to Brainerd, Minnesota for a year, and Ray stayed in Lincoln, and I was never lived alone before in my whole life. And it was good that I was with Ella because she did. My goal for the year was that she would love me more than Elmo, and she did. And now we're getting close to the end, and I just want you to know that I really thanked God that we could spend these years together, because you know that the real Ray from Everybody Loves Raymond, is Ray Larson.
So, if you have questions or comments, or I think this is most meaningful if it's interactive. So we'd be open to any questions or comments. Oh, yes, Mike. Well,
Give Mike a mic.
Mike, use the microphone.
You guys were terrific. Thank you very much. It was a very enjoyable presentation. But I have a question on a couple words that you used in the presentation on Ray's part, and wondered if you could sort of elaborate a little bit. You used the word call 3 times, and at the end there you used the word conflict. And could you elaborate on exactly what you meant on those two?
Sure. I will try to be short. Let me deal with conflict first. One of the interesting things about conflict in a congregation, it usually isn't about theology, or it isn't about the sermons, but it's about management style, just about always. And so in a nutshell, that would be my response about conflict. And a call, that's a very nebulous term. And, we say, well, I feel nature calling. We use that term in all kinds of ways. But as a pastor, my own experience with feeling a call to ministry was nothing compared to the Apostle Paul, who was converted on the Damascus road, and he was blinded. But when I got to college, I began to feel that there was something larger than I am that I needed to be involved in, and now I interpret that as a call to service in a religious context. But then, when as a pastor, you're called from one congregation to the next, and that God always calls to a bigger church with a better salary. I don't know if that helps, but it's hard to nail down.
And we don't have to have any more questions from here, because you could ask us questions individually later, because there's
Judi?
people that have to go.
Excuse me. How many years have you and Ray been married?
58.
Good
On
for
September 3rd.
you. Pardon me?
On September 3rd, it will be 58.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
We're going to renegotiate at 60. Any other? Yes, here's a question over here.
My father ran that little grocery store where people got farmers brought in their trees. For years and years, he sat and took that tree in and tested it, gave them those checks, and got groceries.
You need to repeat that for the people who are watching on TV.
My father.
It's not on.
There.
My father.
Who art in heaven?
ran the little grocery store where they took in cream from the
Ah.
farmers and their eggs and then gave them a check and then they came back out and bought groceries from us. He did that his whole life.
Where was that at?
Adams, North Dakota, which is
Oh,
about 75 miles from Grand Forks, North Dakota.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Anything else? Okay.
He'll pronounce
Oh,
a benediction.
yo.
Thank you, Larson. That was tremendous. I think everybody here enjoyed it. Didn't know quite what it was, but hey,
Thank you.
thank you so much for sharing. And wasn't that great? I think we need more good stories about our family here. And if any of you would like to volunteer to talk, we would love it. We need to get this going, and we'd like to do it every month if we could, but we need some volunteers. So keep it in mind or suggest a friend if that would be a good idea. But I do want to tell you that next week we will have a bio buffs again, and that's going to be Carolyn Modine. She's going to tell us about Susan B. Anthony, so be sure to come back next Monday. That's the 19th for that. I want to thank our tech crew back there. Today it's Nada, and I think the bells are helping out too, so I thank you. And so come back again. Thank you all for coming.